So Damaged was my first book that was published. And what was interesting when Damaged came out in June 2010, I had been working as a writer, an unpublished author, for about 8 years, meaning nobody knew I wrote, and everybody knew me as the mother of 2 kids. So I think they were a little shocked when they read the book. And I sort of have had a lot of people ask me how I went from my professional career and from being, for a period of time, a stay-at-home mom with 2 kids, to becoming a thriller author. And I thought I would give you a little bit of background of sort of, I think, what probably is not atypical for a lot of writers is, I think they start at a very young age. Maggie, who's actually in my writing group, I wonder if you've had the same experience, starting when you were quite young.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
I like to write ever since I was young.
Exactly. I mean, I think that's pretty typical. So this was actually a haiku I wrote in junior high. I don't know if there's any teachers in this group, but I give a lot of credit to my junior high English teacher who really did fan the flame. And I remember writing this haiku, and I think it probably gives an idea of where my leanings towards writing mysteries come from. Because I think that I like to question, the obvious, which this haiku is about. But I didn't actually do much writing after junior high school. The high school English program that I attended in Nova Scotia didn't have much of a focus on creative writing. And so I did my undergraduate degree in English literature with some emphasis on sociology and criminology, and didn't really see an opportunity to explore creative writing. And I'm a fairly pragmatic individual, so I did what a lot of wannabe writers do, as I went to law school. But I know a lot of lawyers who write. Interestingly, they're very different ends of the writing spectrum. This legal writing and fiction writing are pretty polar opposites. But I think there's this kind of a gift for language and interest in words that appeals to writers and to lawyers apart. So I did my articles, and then after I was admitted to the bar, I actually had an interest in public policy as a result of my legal training, and so I did a master's in public administration, almost did my master's in library science.
Well, hey.
And sort of looking at issues of public policy is something that really interests me, and I do try to put it in my books. Damage sort of dealt a little bit with the race of technology, and in this case, biomedical advances versus regulation. And Tattooed really looked at assisted suicide. When I started writing Tattooed, I actually was basing it on the older Supreme Court of Canada case regarding a lady who had ALS, or amyotrophic lateral sclerosis. But I discovered while I was researching it that there was a current appeal, and that is the one that actually was upheld in June when Tattooed came out. So it was kind of an interesting coincidence. After I had my MPA, I ended up working at a very large international consulting firm. I traveled all over North America doing strategy work, and it was that experience working in a very large blue chip environment that inspired me to have a main character as a woman working in this kind of environment, and showing some of the politics and the ambitions and perhaps the gray areas of ethics that can occur in those kinds of environments. So,
do you start with what particular social issue you would like to address in the book, or is it sort of woven in a little more organically?
It's a really good question. Yes. I usually start with the crime, and the crime is often interestingly, it's all you know, when you look at crime, ultimately you take it up a few levels, and it's what violates our social laws, our social justice in many cases, and the policy behind it. So, for example, in Tattooed, I really felt it would be interesting to explore that issue. Really, there's two pendulums of death in the book. One is kind of a very horrible murder, you know, a very intentional type of murder, and the other is an intentional ending of life. And what is that gray area in between? That's kind of what I wanted to look at. I do actually really think about the manner of death before I write the book, and what happens to the antagonist in the book, whether they die by natural means, by choice, are they killed, do they not die? Which, there's a lot of different ways of looking at it. But I think that's one of my, something I like to think about is, you know, these are the consequences of crime and the impact on people and on their lives, and of course the flip side of it is on death. And, you know, thrillers really deal a lot with death, so I'm trying to really think about how I approach it and perhaps give some meaning around it when I write the books. Of course, when I first started writing, I'm not sure that was really at the top of my mind. After I had my kids and I was home with them, I did need to do something that kept me engaged on a slightly different level, so I started writing. I returned to creative writing. I took an adult education class at the Mount, and I had my first assignment, which was poetry, which scared the life out of me. And it was a great assignment, and I love that poem that I wrote. I'm very proud of it. And it was really the only poem I've written since. But I did like it. I eventually wrote my first novel, which is still unpublished. It was 780 pages. When I realized I didn't have to put every single thing I wanted to express in one book. I think songwriters do it a lot better because they get to sort of pick little different themes. I taught myself revision by basically rewriting the book 3 times. And I cut it practically in half. At that point, this book actually did win contests, and I had requests from a major house in New York, which I leveraged to getting an agent, who subsequently I don't think was the best fit for me, but she did end up getting the book sent up to the acquisitions level at a major house in New York. And the way that acquisitions work now in big publishing houses is the editors really rarely have the power to offer you a contract themselves. It is a very global business decision within the publishing house. The acquisitions board consists of marketing, sales, editorial. They are looking at the author brand and whether they have a slot within their list for that kind of book. They may love your book and they still won't buy it. In my case, but it's rather rare to actually get turned down at acquisitions. However, I've never been one to really fit into a lot of stuff. I got rejected. And that's all good, because I'm very happy that book wasn't published. At the time, I was unhappy about it, but you know, this is the nature of the beast in writing, is you really are in a constant state, I think, of transformation. And I have been working on a sequel to the unpublished novel, and so
when did that happen? How long was that?
Oh gosh, see, it was a long time ago. I don't know. I'm trying to remember, when did it happen? Probably I started writing 10 years ago, probably 5 years ago. Yeah. Because after that rejection, I started writing Damaged. And I'll take you through a little bit more of the process that I went through with it. But one of my mindset writing that book, because at that point my kids had started school, and I knew I was trying to make a career in this, and I was doing it in lieu of returning to work. So I actually kind of put myself on a self-imposed deadline to see how fast I could write the book. assuming that I would have a contract for a second book after writing it. So just can't let them get you down. You have to move forward and assume that you're going to be successful. So I completely switched gears. My first book was historical. I decided to write contemporary, and I've always enjoyed murder mysteries, so all I was doing was looking for the right story to begin my book. And the inspiration for Damaged was found in a very small little newspaper article when I was reading the paper one day. And I thought, oh, what a horrific crime. This would make a great book. It was an awful crime, actually, and it was kind of appalling, but it didn't have a lot of media attention on it in Canada. And I thought, well, this is kind of interesting. It's biomedical, which interested me, and it's a criminal case. So I did a lot of research about the case and recognized that the case itself wasn't going to carry a book, but the genesis of the crime would be an interesting plot to research. So I transposed it to a Canadian setting. At that point, I had to make the decision of, do I set my book in Canada, or do I try to set it in the US, where I wasn't familiar with the legal system there. It's quite different, the Canadian and US legal systems. So I decided to take my chances, and I thought, I'll just set it in Halifax and, try to do what Ian Rankin did with his little Scottish, scenario. So when I wrote Damaged, I'll read you the first line. Because I thought, I'm not going to hide the fact what this book is. So, word number 3, the first line of my book is, springtime in Halifax was not known for its warmth or sunshine. Nor was Lyons McGrath Barrett one of Halifax's premier boutique law firms. So I just decided, I'm going to be putting it right out there and see what happens. And I'll tell you what happens in a minute. So anyway, just back to the plot inspiration. I had generally based my stories on actual things that have happened or they've been inspired by the headlines. Indefensible is based on wrongful imprisonment cases. The genesis for that book, the idea came to me when I was in law school. I really wanted to explore what would happen to somebody who was like us, just had a regular life, a career, and was accused of a terrible crime. Examine what that would be like to have everything you defined yourself by pulled out from under you. And then tattooed, going back to Erica's question of why do you start the book, I did take what interested me, which was assisted suicide. I've been interested in that for a long time. I've also had quite an interest in bog bodies from my grade 12 archaeology teacher. And I was just very interested in the tattooing subculture because it's become so mainstream in the last 10 years. So I challenged myself with trying to come up with a plot involving this. So when I start a book, there's sort of 2 main elements. There's inspiration and there's process. I think a lot of people, I get asked a lot, do you write every day? Do you wait for the muse to strike? It's a very airy-fairy world of writing. It's sometimes very hard to make it concrete, but it is a job. I'm at my desk every day with my cup of coffee and my dog, and I often don't know what I'm doing until I start, and I just make myself do it. And which is what most people do in their jobs. So I do find, though, to kind of set the tone and the mood for how I'm approaching the book, because going from getting your kids off to school and, cleaning your kitchen to writing a thriller, sometimes you need a transition in that. I found, interestingly, Shakespeare has always resonated with me, and I found that this particular quote really set the tone for the theme of Damaged, which really is a little bit about purgatory, I think. Everybody in the book is in their own private purgatory. It's a way on how do they reconnect with their lives by the end of the book. So I have it at the beginning of the book. It's a quote. It's, "I am my Father's spirit, doomed for a certain turn to walk the night, and for the day confined to fast and fires. To the foul crimes done in my days of nature are burned and purged away." Now, Indefensible, when I started writing it, I was actually inspired more by a song, which I heard, I think, watching So You Think You Can Dance. Never assume you can't get inspiration in your everyday life. I don't think the audio's on this, is it? Let's see. Not sure the cue is on this.
I want you to cut your hair, and from your lips you do.
Well, I'm not going to play it because I couldn't get it to load up, but that song, when I wrote it, Indefensible, the main character, or one of the main characters who's actually kind of a romantic interest for Kate, is the managing partner of her firm. And he's a little larger than life. He's uber charismatic. He's very successful. He's kind of a man that if you're a single younger woman, you know you shouldn't be attracted to. He's kind of is, maybe a little bit too much. And he, of course, was the perfect character to ruin his life. So he ends up being the prime suspect in the murder of his ex-wife, and suddenly this man who had defined his life by his successes, had to face within a very short period of time a completely different interpretation of who he was. And I heard this song, Hallelujah, and immediately I thought of my character, and I visualized him in this jail cell, and the first scene I wrote in the book was this scene of him, of everything in his life, when he's just sitting in a little cell, which I had actually visited at the provincial courthouse, so I could visualize the scene. It didn't become the first scene of the book, but it was the first scene I wrote to really get in the head of this particular character. Conversely, in Tattooed, instead of trying to get in the head of one of my protagonists, the theme song was for my antagonist, who was really a very unhinged killer, and probably out of the 3 books of killers in my books, the most, I'd say the most unpredictable, because he has a lot of issues with anger management. So he's not kind of a cold, calculating killer, but he's a very passionate, he's sociopathic, but in, kind of an obsessed, stalkerish way with the woman that he loves. And he's an ex-con, his life is really quite awful, but he's also committed some awful crimes. So this song, Mad World, the lyric really spoke to me, because it just seemed a very desperate, very bleak reality for my killer. In particular, this phrase, "the dreams in which I'm dying are the best I've ever had," because he really had nothing to lose. He was at the end. He knew that whatever he did, he wasn't going to survive. So if somebody has nothing to lose and they're after you, you're in big trouble. And this really helped me get the tone for his scenes, because it's not really easy to write the point of view of that kind of killer. And I would actually put those words above his scenes, and I would think about it, and sometimes I'd listen to music before I even wrote, so I could capture the voice that I needed to capture with him and his mood.
Pam, how did you explore the psychology of that killer, or for any of the villains in your novels?
Well, I do a lot of research. I read a lot of really awful cases, to be honest. I don't like to put a lot of violence in my books. I like to keep it off the page, usually. Tattooed probably has the most, because of flashbacks to the crime. There's two crimes that occur in Tattooed. One is the flashback to the original crime and how it connects to the crime that's occurring. And it's told from the point of view of several people who were involved in the crime 17 or 18 years ago. But generally speaking, I read a lot of actual cases. I read a lot of psychologists' analysis of killers, and I read some really awful things. So I don't like to put it all in my books, but that's how I do it. And it can be kind of grueling, actually. And it makes me really careful with my kids. So the process that I use, which comes back to a question that was asked earlier, I start with, I think it's a little different when you're structuring thrillers as opposed to some other genres of writing, because I have to start with the crime. That's sort of the nucleus of my process. And then I look at what are the subject areas that flow out from that crime. Is it biomedical? Is it legal? Is it forensic? What kind of evidence is going to be implicit in this crime? What kind of research do I have to do around that? From that, I look at who would be the characters involved in this that would make for an interesting book that I haven't explored, that would engage readers. That's really one of the best parts of my job, actually, is researching people who are in their actual jobs. I find it fascinating, when I get to interview them and talk to them about their jobs and sort of live out every fantasy I've had of any job From the backstory, then I start creating a sequence of events. So you look at what's going on in their personal lives and what's going on with the crime. And you try to pull that together in a way that keeps the pace of the story going and keeps people rooting for the characters. One of always the interesting challenges is trying to figure out who discovers what piece of evidence. So you first, for example, in Tattooed, I have a dead body. So I make decisions about how was that person killed, what kind of evidence would they find 17 years later, what's plausible for the kind of evidence they would find. How would this evidence lead different people who are involved in the investigation of this crime to solve the crime? Where does Kate fit into this? So there's I'm trying to respect the professions that are involved in it and yet have a plausible storyline for my main character to be involved in solving the crime. So there's usually a lot of juggling. I do a lot of flow charts. So where do my characters come from? Well, as I mentioned before, I had worked in this corporate environment. I wanted to write a character who worked in this kind of pressure-filled environment. I also wanted to write a character who wasn't really an expert in crime investigation, who was sort of more like an everyday person, and explore what would they do in these situations. For example, Kate comes face to face with a serial killer. Would you fight? Would you flee? What's the impact on somebody after that experience, which is what I explored in Defensible, which she has post-traumatic stress syndrome. I just think about when you read the newspaper and you read about every ordinary person who is involved or exposed to an extraordinary crime, what's the consequence of that? And that's what I wanted to write about. I get asked a lot, I've had people say, I know that judge. Not based on that person, and it's true, she isn't. It scares me though. She's not. So I do like to say, there are things that have happened in my books that I have personally witnessed, but they're not based on actual characters. And I like to look at sort of the interactions between people and their different professions as well. I also love dogs, so they're in my books. These are a few of the dogs that have inspired me. Kate has a rescue husky named Alaska, and these are my brother's rescue huskies, Dakota and Montana. And I wrote Damaged only when I knew Alaska, but then Peaches came into our life as our little pug. So she ended up in my third book. Because I think dog ownership or pet ownership can show a lot about characters. And it's not easy writing about dogs. So in terms of the research that I do, I consult with a lot of experts. As you can see, I've been very fortunate that people have been very generous with their time. I make a point of doing a lot of preliminary research before I meet with them because I don't think it's their job to teach me. I think it's their job, they're helping me. So I just try to give them a scenario and make sure that I'm not completely off base. I have a lot of fun with forensic anthropologists though. So for tattoo, the murder actually occurs in a fort, and the body is left in a bog. So we, my handy research assistants, and I, this is my husband, this is my dog, and we went and had some interesting conversations about how you would hide a body for 18 years in a bog that's in a public area, and how you have a strong marriage. It's very useful though, because one thing about our bogs, you read about these bog bodies, which I find quite fascinating. A lot of them are found in bogs that have very, very dense peat, but our bogs don't. So I discovered we have very clear bogs. So then I had to really reassess how I was going to keep my body plausibly hidden for that period of time.
So for these kinds of things, do you have a certain place that really exists in mind in your story? Like, did you write about that specific spot?
Yes, and my children have now asked me to stop writing about their favorite hiking spots. I promised certain areas I will not write about the so keep putting dead bodies up. Prospect, which is actually featured in, I am trying to get beyond Halifax. Damaged has Halifax and Dartmouth in it. Indefensible has the Halifax area and Prospect, which is a really beautiful area. And we were hiking there, and that's when my daughter said, please stop recording these scenes for your crime scenes. And then tattoo, this is actually Chewbacca Head. The fort's there. I mean, I have to say, I just find them really kind of creepy. So I just couldn't help myself, especially with peat bogs. This is so interesting. And I know that my audience, I have books published in 7 countries, and I have a lot of readers in the US, and I like to kind of expose our readers to some of the really neat, we have such interesting geography here. So how do I write? I write like a steam engine. I wish I could write and say I write 10 pages every day and my life would be really sane and organized, but unfortunately, the first third of the book is really the setup of the story, and it takes me a long time because there's a lot of different permutations and combinations and consequences that flow out of writing with numerous characters. So that takes me a lot to figure out. So it's slowly going. The middle of the book, I start building ahead of the steam. By the end, I'm just going crazy. I could write for 10 hours, and I have, especially tattooed, because my deadlines have been very tight. And a lot of it can be first draft, and I'm really going. Like the funeral scene in Damaged. I mean, that scared me. It scared my editor about 3 times. I mean, I wrote that in the middle of the night. These are my performance answers. Robbie? And my dog. She's my little companion.
Do you find that your deadlines are ramping up with as due to the publishing industry, or?
Yeah, that's a good question. Yes. I think readers really do like you to produce quickly. I get asked that a lot. The one thing about writing a series, I've learned a few things about myself. One is I'm not really a fast writer. So I need time to percolate. I find it very stressful to have to produce very quickly because I try to involve more complicated themes in my books, and I have a lot of different characters. I write from multiple points of view. So even revision on one point can be quite complicated if you're changing it through the whole story. And there's a lot of pressure on authors to get their books out fairly quickly. It depends on your publisher. So I had a very rigorous deadline schedule.
When you sold your first book, did you sign for a 3-book series at the
No, what
time?
happened is I actually sold Damaged, which was written and had very few revisions on it. And I sold a second book, which was Indefensible, which was not written. Indefensible was finished before Damaged was even published. So when I submitted Indefensible 6 months before Damaged came out, my publisher had it sitting on their list for quite a while because they were waiting. It takes about a year when you sell it anyway to get it, for it to go through production, but they were waiting for a summer release, which is a better release time. So it sat for a little longer in the pipeline. So I finished Indefensible, and when I submitted the manuscript, my editor read it that weekend, called me on a Tuesday and asked me to have 3 story ideas to her by Thursday. And my daughter's stomach flu. That was challenging. And I had a contract offered to me within, well, it was just before Christmas, so it was the first meeting I had after Christmas. And so they offered me another 2-book contract. So I had 4 books under contract before the first book was even released, which is very unusual. But it meant I had a really rigorous production schedule for all of those books. So one thing that I like to talk about are covers, because this is the cover for Damaged. I could never imagine the cover for this book.
It's blue.
It's blue. Yeah. So exactly. So as a writer, what my publisher did, and I think many do, is they send you out a little, it's almost like filling in a little book report talking about your book for the art department, because they don't all read your book. And you talk about what you like, the tone and the themes, and what covers you don't like. So I'm like, I don't like blue very much. Please don't use faces. Yes, I know. It's a good thing they listen to me, right? And I even, in my huge enthusiasm, sent them my collage that I had done. And Maggie knows a little bit about the collaging process because we talked about it in our group. Sometimes it really helps doing a collage. It helps me isolate themes for my books. So this was a collage I did of Damaged. And it's not really that comprehensible to anyone except for me, but I did send it to the art department. I'm sure they had a really good laugh. And this is what they sent back. And so, and I loved it. It was a great, so it just goes to show I'm not a cover designer. I thought it was a great cover for my book, and they branded it with a water theme and a face for every book in the series. The process from going from manuscript to book is, I start with research, develop character arcs, do my outline, proposal, you write 2 drafts, usually go through revisions with your editor. After revisions, you do what's called line edits, which just tightens the prose, copy edits to find all those errors. And then they send you proofs where it's your last ditch to change anything. And then galleys, which are like your final version before it's published, and then it goes in the store. So it's quite a complicated, and my job ends, well, it goes into production at this point. And that's when it's really hard to change things. Really hard. And they still work from paper on that part of it. I view writing as my career. It's not a hobby. I view it as a business. I view myself as running a small business. And there is a business side to promoting your book. So I have 1 book in the outline stage, 3 books that have been released. The typical promotion for me of my books, I have a really good publicist. So I do media interviews and a lot of blogging. It's very popular online. I actually have been invited to be a Huffington Post blogger, but I have 1 blog up there. I've just been too busy to really write many more. Public appearances. I've done a lot of signings and speaking engagements and a lot of book clubs in my area. I go to conferences, the social networking. I don't know if any of you are on social networks, but I'm on Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn. I don't know what else. I have a website, and I do have a newsletter sign up over here, and I promise you, I will not flood your inbox, because I don't have a lot of time to read. So, but I will be sending out news about my new book when I have news to share. So if you want to find anything out, you can sign up for my email there, or just through my website.
How much of your time is that stuff versus the writing?
Too much. When my books come out, I usually assume I have at least 6 weeks of non-writing time. It's really busy, just doing engagements, planning a launch, doing interviews. It's just a different form of communication, and my brain doesn't really multitask that well. I find just even writing blogs, it's different than writing my books. And when I write, I really need to, especially if you're deep in a manuscript, it takes me an hour even just to get my head into where I was, because I'm reading who did what, where, and what the mood is, and so when I have to suddenly write a blog, and I think because of my legal training, I'm very, very careful about what I leave on the internet, so I don't write blogs lightly. I write very carefully, and it takes me time to do it. So I've now just learned that if my book comes out in June, not to assume I'll be writing till mid-July. Plus, there's usually a lot of writing conferences in the summer, so if I do those, I'm traveling, and your brain's dead for a week after you get back, because you're so busy at these conferences. It's hard to
And while you're writing, do you just shut anything else off, or do you still do this social media stuff?
I do the social media stuff to some degree, just because it's a little warm-up. Say it's procrastination, but it can be. I usually just do it first thing in the morning when I sit at my computer and catch up on my emails and go on Facebook for a little bit, but my Facebook ties into Twitter. I don't really do LinkedIn, even though I have an account, but it's too much. It's just, you can't do it all, and I'm not really sure of the value of it. I think the best product you can do is really write a book for people. So I'm trying to not do as much as I have done, especially when I'm promoting a book. If I have engagements, they go on all my social media, so I'm updating it pretty regularly. Well, this is the part every writer hates in the reviews. I get very nervous when they come in your inbox. I'm so lucky. I've had some fabulous reviews for my books. It's been lovely. But don't think that you end up unscathed. So I like to say, I took a lot of pride in that review. I don't think dogs are easy to write. Especially Alaska. So I actually felt that writer really got me at a very fundamental level of why did it with a dog. But I don't even read my reviews anymore. You can't, because this is the one thing I've learned along this journey is that to write, you have to be so thin-skinned. You're going so deep into your characters. I mean, I now cry when I watch a dog in a movie. It's embarrassing. My kids laugh at me, but Dan knows. But you're expected to be very thick-skinned about reviews. And sometimes it's hard to turn it off, and so my lesson is I just don't read them. I try not to, unless, usually I try to read a few of the advanced reviews just to know whether I hit it or not, and then I leave it all alone. I've had a number of foreign editions come out in the last year, all in Scandinavia, so Canadian crime in Scandinavia, Scandinavian crime in Canada, and France. And I'm also in this anthology, Love is Murder, which if you follow my series, there's this recovering alcoholic criminal defense lawyer named Eddie Bench, who helps Kate in Indefensible and has a role in Tattooed. And I explore the case that actually broke him, that caused him to relapse into alcoholism. And it's loosely based on an actual crime. And it's called Break Even. And I'm actually very proud of that story. I liked it. So to end with, I get asked this question a lot: why is crime fiction so compelling? And the answer came to me in a cubicle, and the ladies' room, written in graffiti. Somebody put Nietzsche on the wall, and I thought, that's why crime fiction's so compelling. I think, I've had people say, why do you write some scary stuff? It's very dark. Why are you, do you like to scare people? No, I don't. I actually don't watch horror movies. I don't like a lot of violence. But it allows me, and I think readers, to explore their fears about what happens. And I think that's why crime fiction is compelling, is because we see what all those gray areas are in the black and white of our law. And, the decisions that are made, the consequences that happen, set against a framework where our sense of right and wrong is violated. And so I think that's why it's compelling, and that's why it compels me to write it. And that is the end of my presentation. I hope you had some insight into where these came from, and if you have any questions, I'd certainly be happy to answer them.
Were you ever pressured to change your fictional story away from Halifax?
Oh, I like that question. Yeah, that's what I meant to get back to. Thank you for reminding me. No, I was flat out rejected. I couldn't. This is what is interesting about the series. I took a risk setting it in Halifax, Nova Scotia, Canada, and selling it to a major publisher in New York, because our local publishing market is geared towards thrillers. So I knew that my publisher would be based in New York. And I also knew that it would be a challenge to sell it. However, I felt that I would try to make Halifax a really sexy place. So anyway, to answer your question, I was rejected by several publishers who said they did not do well with books set in Canada. Period. It had nothing to do with Halifax, but just Canadian fiction in general. And then I had other rejections where someone loved the characters but hated the plot, or they loved the plot and hated the characters. And, it's so subjective. The editor who bought it, I don't even think it occurred to her that it was a problem. And I was still nervous about it, but then before Damage came out, about 3 months beforehand, when it had been sold into the stores, which is what happens, the buyers sell you in. They talk you up and sell you into the bookstores, and I was an editor's pick internally, so they sold me up really well. And the buyers in the U.S., who were the buyers for Target and Walmart, they're not the buyers anymore, but at the time it was Levy Home Entertainment, the distributor. They chose me as one of their reading picks for June. And so my book ended up being put in the top 10 bestseller display across all the Targets and Walmart in the U.S., which I took a lot of pride in, that Halifax was worthy of my book. This is great. I mean, so it just goes to show. And interestingly, I met one of the heads of the publishers who rejected me, and he said, if you ever decide to leave, we would be interested. So, it's an important lesson about rejection, is those doors don't stay closed. The agent I have now, his agency rejected me with a form letter 8 years ago. So, it's not, you just have to prove yourself. And I think just believe in yourself, so.
You said your first agent wasn't a good fit.
No.
What happened there? What's this?
Well, I don't really kiss and tell a lot, but.
Well, I mean,
no. Basically, I had moved in a different direction. The agent I first worked with actually was representing my first unpublished manuscript, which was a historical. And the thriller genre is fairly specific, and there's editors and agents who really sell and acquire in that area. And I didn't find that I was getting the kind of support I needed for my career. And, that was a hard business decision. The thing is because the way that it works with an agent is you pay 15% commission off the sale of your book. She will always have her commission off the book she sold. It's just that for further books, I chose to work with someone else, so, yeah. I thought she did pretty well, indeed, so.
And you mentioned your writing group. Is it just a mystery or crime fiction writing group, or is it all genres?
That's a good question. So I started because rewind 10 years. Before there was even so much information on the internet about writing and getting published, I was writing a historical novel that had a romantic element in it. So I decided to join Romance Writers of Atlantic Canada because I knew that they had a database, an industry database of agents, and I wanted to access that because they keep it very current. And I knew that agents and editors for different houses wouldn't just be specifically acquiring pure romance, they would acquire a broad base. So I joined RWA for that reason, and the very unexpected benefit was my local writing chapter, which is Romance Writers of Atlantic Canada, who has a fabulous group of authors who've actually published in every romance genre, most of the major houses in New York, and a bunch of indie published authors now. So they have been very supportive. I learned a lot about novel construction through them. And then when I decided to write a thriller, I just continued to be part of the group because I had some very good friends there. And Maggie's actually met her, and I hope you've had a similar experience.
Very supportive, very inspiring, really help each other out a lot.
Yeah, they're very professional, and everyone's really willing to help. And I'm sure they're in the library here, a lot of their titles, because they're excellent authors. You should check out the website. We've got some good writers there. Any other questions?
Yeah, it's peculiar that you said you got your first novel was well received by publisher, and that's how you got the agent. I thought the agents are supposed to get your publishers.
Yeah, no, that's a really very astute question. No, a lot of agents like to. I think what happened is I had the interest of an editor via a contest, and so I had won a contest, and the editor who judged the contest requested my book. And before I sent it to the editor, I contacted different agents to represent me with that. So the reality is, though, agents are extremely discriminating, and they are flooded with writers. They run a business themselves, so they basically take writers that they feel are sort of further along professionally in their career and can help launch. So, I don't know, I'm not an agent, but I know it's very difficult to get one. So.
Well, thank you, Pamela, for coming
My pleasure.
all this way and for giving us such a fabulous talk.
Thank you.